to our second topic point today, which is the use of AI for recruitment and talent assessment. And I just want to talk about, in the round really, how have we seen AI start being used in talent assessment? And well, let's start with recruitment, shall we, actually, because that's the start of it. And how do we see that changing? I mean, Tom, do you want to give us your experience of where you see it starting in recruitment? Where's AI come in?
So it's interesting. We first really looked at AI as a business in terms of the assessment of candidates probably about 5 years ago.
Okay.
So we were approached by a company that were looking at doing analysis of video. So we started out as a video interviewing company, so that was at the time, that's what a large chunk of our business was about. And we looked at ways that we thought, well, great, is there a way that we can use AI to analyse the videos that the candidates were recording to basically try and pick up on, you know, on personality traits, on various other sort of maybe emotions. Did they look confident? Were they nervous? And at the time, I remember the company we were working with were talking about, well, this is all going to be around honesty. So it was you could ask a question and you know, almost like the sort of online video lie detector sort of thing, that you'd be able to see, oh, that candidate, you know, definitely a bit dodgy, then probably not answering that question correctly, or, you know, completely honestly. And I remember at the time we thought this is going to be transformative. You know, this is going to really make life so much easier for recruiters. They're not going to have to sit through watching lots of videos and doing interviews, etc. But at the time, we found that there just wasn't. Now, again, this was 5 or 6 years ago. There wasn't necessarily the computing power or the accuracy to be able to say, no, that's definitely right. So you couldn't make a decision on it. You know, there's no way you could say, oh, that person's definitely right for this role based on how they answered a particular question. So we sort of kind of canned that at the time and sort of put it to one side and just kept a sort of a watching brief really to see how it evolved and how it's developed. So I think that's probably still not really there at the moment. Again, especially when you're doing a video interview over a camera phone or, you know, with background and noise and various other things, I think it's impossible to really assess the candidate from that perspective. But certainly there are other ways, I believe, that from an assessment perspective that you can possibly use it. I suppose there's two sides to it, isn't there? There's as a recruiter, you're using AI to streamline your administrative process. So, and then there's from the candidate's perspective, as they're using AI to optimise their responses and their answers and give what seems to be the perfect model answer, because that's being generated in ChatGPT. So then from a technology perspective, how do we guard against that? And I know we'll come on to that a bit later on.
Rebecca, in terms of the recruitment process, or particularly looking at early years or early careers, how has AI started to enable or has it enabled that recruitment process? Do you want to talk to me about the evolution there and how AI has come to the fore for you?
So I think that AI is very disruptive right now for recruitment and for talent acquisition professionals. Okay. I think that that there's on the plus that there's an opportunity to streamline your recruitment process, to have predictive potential analytics, to have built algorithms that will allow potentially diverse candidates to come through that process. So that is, very much something that most talent acquisition professionals would embrace. But then on the downside, there is a huge impact that I think companies did not predict, that is more behaviour driven, around potential candidate inauthenticity. So in a high volume recruitment process where you've got thousands of candidates entering the process, there are what ChatGPT and other AI tools have allowed is that it is actually easier to cheat now. And cheating has been around for hundreds and thousands of years. It's always been there, but it's now easier to cheat. So what companies are seeing, and I've spoken to many companies, are fake applications, right through to potentially candidates that are not authentic on video interviews, so called migration agents, through to improbable scores. So has AI or technology enabled candidates to pass certain cognitive tests, right through to effectively sharing of assessments online and effectively help AI and technology enabling candidates to pass certain recruitment processes. So I think there's and as a result of AI and technology, it's actually made recruitment more difficult. So the idea is it should streamline, but now you have to be able to design a recruitment process that has an active detection model built in, that has a deterrence, and it needs to be designed well. So it's actually making TA more difficult.
Helpful. I think we talked earlier about the impact of AI on candidates' ability to apply for roles. And I just wanted to come back to that point because it's interesting how candidates are able, through the use of AI, to apply for many, many, many more roles. And actually the talent pool effectively per vacancy has exploded in some regards. And you've got a massive pool of talents that you need to be able to work through. And whether AI has kind of made its own bed in some ways because people are so able to apply for vacancies and find those roles that the pools fill up, and then you've got talent acquisition managers trying to work through this and using AI to help themselves. So it almost seems like one has caused the other.
So this is the unpredicted consequence that's happened with AI. So if we talk about early careers in particular, the student behaviour is one that is possibly anti-loyal organisations. So students, the trends are that they're doing 5 internships, they're collecting internships, collecting work experience. And this was also down to COVID impacts, where there was a reduction of roles in the market. So students realised that they need to apply for many more roles. And then if you speak to finalists that are looking, so 45% of finalists are actually looking for roles in the graduate market. 55% haven't actually thought about applying. They're perhaps taking a gap year, and there's this concept of delayed adulthood because of the impact of COVID. But the 45% that are applying are possibly applying for 20 roles. This was pre-AI. What AI is enabled now with some of the auto apply tools, and there's many of them available, and there's one in particular that is graduate specific. It will allow graduates to effectively apply to hundreds of opportunities that are completely skills matched, that will generate application answers based on company specific questions. So it has really enabled students to throw in many more applications, which again is making it much more harder for organisations to sift through, to detect those genuine candidates, but also it will increase cost base for an organisation because there will be more volume coming through as well.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, whether candidates using AI, whether this is fake, whether this is plagiarism, or whether this is enhancement of offer, I guess, from a candidate perspective. And I don't know, Bertie, whether you've got any examples on or thoughts around when does the enhancement of a proposition cross the line? And this is a very difficult question, so I'm not going to hold you to your answer. But I think it's an interesting one to talk about this morning. Is the use of AI from a candidate's perspective, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is actually how can AI be used and how should AI be used in this process. And we see at university a lot of assessments that are not in-person controlled assessments. We see a lot of submissions that we suspect are generated by AI. Now, as with AI algorithms, looking at them as a human might produce false positives, false negatives. And there's not really a way to completely avoid that at all. In terms of improving an output, we at university would say, well, as long as the ideas are actually something that the human put into this, and they're just using AI as a tool to rephrase, to polish the presentation of this, then that's okay. But I can imagine that there are roles that people could apply for that require just that eloquence, and if they pretend to be eloquent by using AI and then turn out not to be in a role that cannot be supported by AI, that might be a problem, of course.
I think there's an issue here around integrity, and particularly if you look across industry right now, where you have some industries or some professions that are highly regulated, that, for example, law or accountancy, finance. And so it's absolutely imperative that candidates that enter those professions have the utmost integrity. So I think certain professions, it's important that the candidate is the genuine candidate, that they've actually sat, if there's a requirement to sit a numeric test or a cognitive test, and that is part of the academic, success of that role in terms of being professionally qualified, then it's important that that candidate is authentic and they're set up to succeed. But that said, if you're outside of the regulated industry and you're working in tech, for example, or it's a creative industry, then AI, I guess in that situation it would be much more adoptive and it can be more embraced. But I think there is definitely an integrity question around, did you actually sit that test yourself, or was it generated via AI, the answers?
So in terms of building AI into the talent assessment process, I think we've talked about it from recruitment in terms of reducing the pool of candidates down by having some sort of hurdle-based programmes. How do we think it's best to embrace AI in talent assessment? Would there be any things that we'd want to say, actually this would be a sensible idea, or actually this would be something to guard against? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think, from my perspective, it's that, if I'm honest, we did a speech up in Manchester a couple of months ago, and we talked to the audience. It was an interactive workshop, and I think that the underlying feeling at the end of that workshop was that we don't know at the moment, to be honest with you. I think nobody really knows whether or not we should be going full on and saying, look, AI is out there, it's everywhere you look, we've just got to embrace it, we've just got to accept that when we're recruiting for a role, we've got to understand that candidates are going to most likely use it. So in that case, what do we do to guard against that? So do we try and stop them? So do we try and put measures in place so that it becomes harder for them to actually use the AI to provide their answer that they want to give? Again, I think one of the interesting things that came out of, a conference I was at earlier in the year, for early careers, and they were saying that every application that was coming through looked exactly the same, because all the candidates were doing is they were going onto the job spec, cutting and pasting the job spec and the person profile, all that sort of thing, sticking it into ChatGPT, and surprise, it spewed out pretty much, maybe with a slight variation, the same answer. And a lot of candidates, as you alluded to earlier, they'll just apply for every job they can, and they won't even go to the effort of actually saying, okay, that's my model starting point, and I'm going to personalise it, I'm going to adapt it to suit my own particular skill sets and what have you to make it apply to that role. So that becomes really difficult from a recruiter's perspective, because they all look the same. And then, as you say, if you've got traditional cognitive assessments and psychometric assessments which are being done or being assisted by the use of AI, how do you then start to balance against those candidates to see whether or not differentiate them?
Can I bring in a difficult word that I'd like us to discuss a little bit in this, if that's okay, which is the word bias. And I want to talk about bias in the talent assessment process, particularly where AI is involved. I want to understand whether we think that, how do we ensure, or how do we guard against rather than mitigate, because I'm not sure you can, but we talked a little bit about bias, and I want to talk about it really from a demographic perspective as well, and accessibility to AI tools and so on. And I know as a group earlier we talked about accessibility to AI and how some applicants who perhaps don't have access to these tools would face some sort of detriment in the recruitment or talent assessment process. And I don't know, but I know we talked a little bit about it. Do you want to carry on from there?
I think the important thing here is to understand that these AI algorithms are not actually typically algorithms that someone programs and makes decisions on how does a particular phrase impact the chance of getting a job. It is more like using data pools that are available. And of course, if there is bias in that data pool, if, say, in the medical sector, in the past we've had more male doctors than female doctors in certain areas, then that might have some bias effect on the recruitment process, because it might favour those, and that's where we need that awareness of how are these decision-making processes actually generated based on data that's available.
I think there's an accessibility issue here for particularly for social mobility. So if we think about this, I guess logically, as a recruiter, I may all of a sudden receive 400 candidate CVs, and actually I might use AI to select the top 10 candidates. And the reality is that the likelihood is that those top 10 candidates have an AI facilitated process, and the likelihood is that they perhaps are using a paid version of an AI tool, so as an optimizer. So I think until we can get to true predictive analytics in HR to look at those pipelines and to be able to start to differentiate between paid AI or accessibility versus social mobility, then and that's one of the great opportunities for AI is the predictive modelling and most likely outcome type approach, and how do you actually then build your recruitment process to ensure that there is equity and equality. But we are not there yet, and I think there is a real risk right now that we're using AI and there are early adopters that are literally embracing AI and putting it into their recruitment process, but there are unintended consequences around equality. And also, if we think about, I was at a conference last year where there was 100 career advisors at universities, and they felt that the organisations are adopting technology so quickly that there is definitely a disadvantage to students that don't actually have the same tools or access to the same tools as those students that perhaps have a little bit more privilege.
Yeah.
So I think one of the important things we need to look at here is something called XAI, explainable AI. Okay. So in those processes where we might suspect there's a bias, we can use explainable AI models to highlight what are the features of the data set that we're using, or the data that we're using, that contribute to the decision that's been made. And this doesn't come without caveats, because there's been cases shown where different explainability models might disagree about what is the predominant feature. So that we're kind of moving into an area of...
I guess the other point to make on this is it's really valid. It's like if you have a propensity to hire the same type of talent, so for example, this talent is a specific demographic, then effectively will AI follow that trend? Because it is learning, it's machine learning. So how do you bring different context into the recruitment process? How do you ensure that you're not overlooking certain talent pools, because actually the organisation may not need the same type of talent pool? They perhaps want to hire a broader church of talent, but how is AI developed within the recruitment process to be able to bring that talent pool through? And I think that for me is a big issue at the moment around the lack of context that AI is actually enabling within the recruitment process.
And do you think talent acquisition leaders are skilled enough and they have enough knowledge at the moment to really think these things through, or do you think it's going to be an evolution and we'll learn as we go? How do you think that's going to work? I'm
hearing on the ground that there are TA leaders that are very reticent to adopt AI, and there's they are effectively do not want to become the early adopters, but they are, as you mentioned earlier, absolutely looking in and observing, but there are some organisations that are absolutely adopting, and there's a large organisation that is using it as screening all candidates, for example, and there's some use cases here that they've managed to save millions of pounds in cost avoidance by reducing that talent pool and creating efficiencies. But actually, what are the long-term consequences? Because has a study been undertaken around the kind of talent that's been hired? So it's I think we will see, and it's going to only be a test of time, I guess, until we start seeing some of the case studies.
I think there's another issue that concerns me, to be honest with you, as well, is if we start to use more and more AI, as you say, screen these candidates to get that number down, that big number down, to a smaller number. And the problem is, if you're building out that model on the basis of our perfect candidate or our perfect employee looks like this, and then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with teams that are full of basically lookalikes. Everybody's exactly the same, and that's obviously you ruin your diversity. So again, there's all that issues around diversity and inclusion, etc. And you end up with teams with everybody looks the same, and then productivity falls through the floor because we've always done it. We all look the same.
There's no diversification.
No fresh thinking.
There's lots of examples of this where AI. So if you're thinking about reducing that candidate pool, it's very likely that a talent acquisition professional, because I am one of them, so it's very likely that the thought process that we would go through would be, let's actually use the same sector experience, and let's shortlist candidates based on the same market vertical, so thereby you're not bringing any diversity of thought in from different sectors. So this might actually prevent organisations from growing, because actually they're not bringing that broad set of talent through the organisation. So I think that we have to be careful around how we use AI. I think there's an opportunity to use it and embrace it, but we just need to be careful that we're not and there are not unintended consequences of trying to bring that list down, but actually you're hiring the same kind of people.
Yeah,
that's a big problem with these generative AI approaches altogether, when they draw from that diverse set of data all of what we've written in case of ChatGPT over decades and hundreds and thousands of years if you go into really early texts. If we now move to generating everything by ChatGPT, we will not have that creativity anymore. Yeah. It will all be the same. It'll be narrowed down even further, and
to the knowledge base that exists purely in ChatGPT, because that's from where it can draw all of its content.
And then you lose all those opportunities to make that big leap of faith or that big leap of technology. You end up with everything just becomes very similar.
Same.
Yeah, exactly.
And sometimes you want some blue sky thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and different industries have different diversities, right? So, if you're in engineering, for example, it's very male dominated. So if you're then only hiring in engineering, then no shock, you will have a male dominated candidate pool. So, I think that for a TA professional, we need to be looking outside of the box, and we need to be thinking about how do we find transferable skills, and this then feeds into skills-based hiring, which is the biggest, I guess the biggest buzzword in TA right now. So how do we move more towards skills-based hiring to allow that diversification, to allow more contextual thinking? And I think that's an exciting opportunity for TA, but we're not there yet. So it's an evolution.
No, thank you.